Hi, folks. Welcome back to Sourced by Cofactr, where we cut through the noise and get to the good parts. I'm Ed Dodd. Thanks for joining. Okay, so I want you to picture a warehouse. You know, the generic movie version of a warehouse. What are you seeing? Forklifts, big stacks of boxes, a lot of noise, maybe a forklift racing around a corner, maybe a pallet of soda cans wobbling on a high shelf. It's, loud. It's physical. The risks are obvious. They're what we call visceral risks in logistics. They hit your senses right away. You don't need a manual to know that a collapsing shelf is bad. Might even kill someone. But today, we are going to talk about a completely different set of risks. And the biggest thing is that in an electronics warehouse, the things that kill you are invisible. I mean, if you run a general distribution center, your god is speed. Move the box, ship the box. But in an electronics warehouse, speed matters, sure, but you're also fighting this constant silent war against the latent defect. Latent defect. That sounds, I don't know, like a legal term or something. But in this context, it's actually terrifying. Oh, it's the worst case scenario. A latent defect is a problem that just sits quietly inside a product, a microchip, a motherboard, and it doesn't show up for weeks, maybe months. The warehouse can look surgically clean, but if you've missed these invisible threats, you're essentially shipping ticking time bombs. And that is our mission today. We are going to expose these invisible killers. We're going to look at how a warehouse operates when the inventory is like terrified of static electricity, allergic to moisture, and in some cases, legally classified as a weapon. And we'll see why that old school mentality of tribal knowledge, just ask Steve, he knows how to handle it, is an absolute recipe for disaster here. Okay, so let's start with the first silent killer, static electricity. Electrostatic discharge, ESD, is the silent assassin of the semiconductor world. Maybe you think of static as just that little zap you get when you touch a doorknob in winter. It's annoying, but you just move on. But that same little spark is a disaster for a component. When you walk around on a vinyl floor, you build up a charge of 5 to 15,000 volts. On a carpet, you can build a charge of 3 to 35,000 volts. The charge is very low current, so it doesn't kill you, but starting at around 2,000 volts, you might feel it. Above 10,000 volts, you really feel it. For a human, it's a nuisance. For a microchip, it's a catastrophe. Why? Because it only takes 100 volts to damage an IC. Yeah, just 100 volts. So that 2,000 volt charge you probably won't even feel is 20 times the charge necessary to damage a component. Yikes. And even worse, most ESD damage doesn't actually kill the chip instantly. It doesn't just fry. That would almost be better, right? You'd plug it in, it wouldn't work, you'd toss it. But ESD is almost always silent damage that does not instantly kill. Think of it like a minor stroke for the chip. It degrades the internal circuitry just enough to weaken it. It passes the warehouse test. It passes the assembly line test. It gets installed in, say, the navigation system of a car. And then 6 months later, the GPS glitches when you're on the highway, or the airbag sensor fails intermittently. That is called a latent defect. And for a business, that just destroys your reputation. So how does a warehouse fight an enemy you literally cannot see? The core standard is ANSI/ESD S20.20. It is the industry Bible, and it basically dictates that the entire warehouse has to be weaponized against static. It starts with the floor. Vinyl is bad. Carpet is horrible. Unpolished concrete is actually not too bad. And grounded conductive flooring is the best, but it's pretty expensive. But the main threat here is the human element, because let's be honest, we are just walking static generators. We really are. Every time you scuff your feet, you're building up thousands of volts. So the human protocols are incredibly strict. You wear wrist straps connected to a ground point, you have specialized footwear or foot straps, but it's not enough to just have the gear. You also need testing rigor. Wrist straps have to be tested daily. Does that feel like overkill? It's not. I mean, think about the risk. If your strap has a tiny break in the wire, you are now a walking weapon handling thousands of dollars worth of components. Okay, so we've got invisible lightning handled. Let's talk about invisible water, which can cause the famous popcorn effect. It is a very descriptive term for a very violent process. Google some pictures if you've never seen it. Pretty dramatic. The mechanism here is kind of fascinating. On a macroscopic level, the epoxy and resins often used for semiconductor packaging are water permeable. So if you leave a sensitive chip out in a humid room, it just slowly absorbs water molecules from the air. Now at room temp, it doesn't really hurt it. The moisture just sits there. So when does it explode? It happens when the part gets soldered onto a circuit board. And to do that, it goes through a reflow of it. We are talking temperatures around 240 to 260 degrees Celsius. That's what, nearly 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Extremely hot. And let's go back to basic physics. What happens to water at 100 degrees Celsius? It boils, turns to steam instantly. And steam takes up vastly more volume than liquid water. It expands rapidly, so that tiny bit of trapped moisture inside the chip expands and literally cracks the package from the inside out, just like a kernel of corn. Now, usually it's not as dramatic as popcorn. It's much more likely to be a microscopic crack. You might not see it, but you've broken the seal. Oxygen gets in, corrosion starts, and the device fails 6 months down the line. This leads us to the moisture sensitivity level, or MSL 1 through 5 rating system. MSL tell us how long parts can be outside of moisture-proof storage. Level 1 means no restriction. Level 2 parts can be exposed for a year. Level 3 for a week. Level 4 for 3 days. And level 5 for 2 days. Past these limits, the parts are considered unsafe to solder. But you can save them. You can bake the parts. Now, we are not talking about tossing them into a toaster oven here. Please do not do that. No, we use precision industrial ovens, but the concept is similar. You need to bake the parts at a certain temp for a certain time, all governed by J standard 033. Most commonly, you bake at 125 degrees Celsius for 24 to 72 hours, depending on component thickness. That's a slow roast. Why so long? You have to be gentle. You're trying to coax the water molecules back out of the packaging without melting the silicone or warping the metal leads. If you heat it up too fast, you cause the very damage you're trying to prevent. It really hits home that an electronics warehouse isn't just stacking boxes, it's environmental management. You're managing ions, you're managing humidity. It's closer to running a laboratory than a garage. Okay, now let's talk about organizing chaos. Specifically, segregation. In an electronics warehouse serving multiple customers, segregation can be make or break. Imagine you're a warehouse storing parts for 50 different electronics companies. Pretty standard. Now, it's very common for company A and company B to both use the exact same resistor from the exact same manufacturer. Same part number, same specs. So physically, they're identical, but contractually, whole different world. Company A might require their parts come from a specific country of origin, say for a government contract. Company B doesn't care. Do you see where this is going? If a picker runs out of stock for Company A, it can be pretty tempting to just grab a Rio from Company B's pile to fill the order. They have just committed a massive compliance violation. Yeah, even though the part works perfectly, it violates the contract. That's why you need robust inventory segregation. You need physical zones, but also systemic force fields. The software has to stop them, right? The warehouse management system, the WMS, has to be smart enough that if I scan Company B's part for Company A's order, the scanner just screams at me and refuses to process it. Now, let's move on to a subject that can feel like a procedural crime drama: counterfeit. It's a massive shadow industry, especially during global shortages. There are lots of reasons to buy from unauthorized distributors, aka brokers, and lots of high-integrity brokers. But nonetheless, brokers are where counterfeits slip in. First, let's be clear what our industry means by counterfeits, because it's not the same meaning as, say, a fake Rolex watch. In electronic components, a counterfeit part is one that is not what it says it is. When you buy from a broker, the order will be for parts that are both new and original. A part is not new if it was soldered onto a board before, or if the pins have been recoded, or if it has been remarked. It might be an authentic part, but not new, so we still refer to it as counterfeit. Part is not original if the internal die does not match the external marking. If the part is marked as some ST micro part, but the die is marked TI, we call this counterfeit. So we mitigate counterfeits by inspection. There's a number of standards, but AS6081 is probably the most common. Let's look at common forms of counterfeiting and how we inspect for them. First, there's blacktopping. What exactly is it? Okay, so imagine a counterfeiter. They don't build new chips that cost billions. Instead, they find OEM excess, old circuit boards, even discarded computers. They pull off the old chips, these are used, slow, outdated. Then they sand off the top layer of the casing to remove the old markings. Then they spray a new layer of black epoxy on top. That's the black top. It makes the chip look shiny and new. And then they just print new text on it. Voila, a 10-year-old part now has a current date code. They print high-speed specs on a low-speed chip. They make a 50-cent part look like a $5 part. It's just so devious, but you can catch it with marking tests. This one is actually really simple. The original factory casing is incredibly durable, but that fake black topping ink, it's not as strong. So inspectors will take a swab with acetone and literally swipe the surface of the chip, and if the logo wipes off, it's a fake. Acetone is just nail polish remover, by the way, so that can be all it takes. If a part fails, you reject it and you're done. If it passes, you go deeper. You use X-rays. You look inside the sealed chip without opening it. You measure the size of the silicon die. You look at the pattern of the little gold wires inside. It's like checking dental records. If the spec sheet says the die should be 5 millimeters wide and your X-ray shows it's only 3 millimeters, you've got a problem. For lots of reasons, X-ray may not be enough. So now you consider the nuclear option: decapsulation, destructive testing. In decap, inspectors literally melt the plastic casing off the chip to expose the raw silicon. Then they put it under a high-power microscope. The original manufacturer actually etches their logo and part number right onto the silicon, like a watermark. You can't fake that. Now this brings us to a final layer of invisible risks. We've talked about physical risks, segregation risks, and fake parts. Now let's talk about some compliance landmines: ITAR and SOC 2. This is where an electronic warehouse needs to go beyond being just a storage space and think more like a data fortress. Let's start with ITAR, International Traffic and Arms Regulations. ITAR regulates things on the USML, the United States Munitions List. Very few components are listed on the USML, so why would ITAR have anything to do with a warehouse? Because the components might not be ITAR regulated, but the data about them can be restricted. It's not that the data is a weapon, it's that the data reveals the application. Let's say your warehouse management system, your software, has a notes field, and a helpful engineer types in something about the Naval Guidance Upgrade project. Sounds helpful, but that text string is now technical data related to a defense article. Under ITAR, there's a rule called deemed export. This is the part that trips everyone up. If a temporary worker in your warehouse who happens to be a foreign national looks at that screen and reads that, you've effectively exported that secret to their home country. Legally, you have committed an export violation without anything ever leaving the building. Wow, so the risk isn't just someone stealing the chip, it's someone simply reading a computer monitor. The fix isn't armed guards, it's role-based permissions in the software. The person driving the forklift needs to see bin A, shelf B. They do not need to see Project Alpha. That is a subtle but massive difference. And then there's SOC 2. I usually hear about SOC 2 compliance for like tech startups, cloud companies. Why is a warehouse worrying about it? Because a modern electronics warehouse handles rich data on complex software, and some really bad old school habits can inadvertently violate SOC 2. The basic scanner is one example. You have a handheld barcode scanner. It's a hassle to type in a username and password on that tiny screen. So what do the floor managers do? They create one generic login called Scanner1 and tape the password to the back of the device. It's convenient. Everyone just picks it up and goes. But for SOC 2, convenience is the enemy of compliance. It destroys accountability. SOC 2 is all about auditability. If Scanner 1 marks $50,000 of inventory as scrapped, who did it? Was it Steve? Was it Sarah? You have no idea. The data integrity is just gone. And it extends to paper too. You print out a pick list. It has the customer's name, their home address, what they ordered, and then you leave it on a desk while you go to lunch. In a SOC 2 world, that is a data breach. Risk compliance is about the discipline to shred that paper or lock your screen when you walk away. It's boring, and people hate doing it, but it's absolutely essential for compliance. It's funny, isn't it? We started this deep dive talking about ions and humidity, and now we're talking about screen locks and paper shredders. It really shows the spectrum of risk an electronics warehouse has to defend against, the laws of physics and the laws of government. So let's try to synthesize all this. What is the big takeaway? Why should someone listening to this care about warehouse protocols? I think if we look at the journey we just took, the common thread is that successful electronics warehousing isn't just about being fast. It's about having a documented management system that prevents slow failures. It's easy to stop a fast failure if a shelf collapses. You see it, you fix it. But a slow failure, like a moisture-damaged chip that dies 6 months later, or a counterfeit that slips through because nobody did the acetone test, that's what destroys customer trust. And once that trust is gone, it is very, very hard to get back. In this industry, reliability is the currency. Here's a provocative thought to leave our listeners with. We always worry about breaking our electronics. I dropped my phone or I spilled coffee on my laptop. We blame ourselves, assume it's our clumsiness. But how many of our devices are actually doomed before we even open the box? How many phones or laptops are destined to die young, not because we dropped them, but because 6 months ago they sat in a humid room for 2 hours too long? Or because a worker logged into scanner 1 and bypassed a safety check? That is a disturbing but very valid question. It's the Schrodinger's cat of electronics. It's broken and working at the same time. And you won't know until it's too late. The invisible history of the device matters just as much as how you treat it today. A lot to think about next time you unbox and you dodge it. Thank you all for joining me on Sourced by Cofactr. I'm Ed Dodd. I hope we cut through some noise and helped you get to the good parts. We're really excited about our new pay-as-you-go service model. It's free to try, so check it out today. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe and follow Cofactr.